The Desert Keeper. The setting sun cast long shadows across the painted mesas of Arizona's Monument Valley, transforming the landscape into a fiery tableau of crimson and gold. Michael Harrison, 51, peered through the heat ripples rising from the baked earth, his weathered face impassive but his eyes, green as spring sage, missing nothing. 28 years with the U.S. Marshals Service, tracking fugitives across the most unforgiving terrain in America, had honed his senses to near preternatural levels. Even now, 3 years into retirement, he could read the land like others read morning papers. He never imagined he'd use those skills to track the woman who wore his ring. Through his precision scope, Michael observed the dilapidated trading post that locals called Last Chance Station, a weathered relic from Route 66's glory days now standing alone amid the vast emptiness. The approaching dust cloud materialized into a white Jeep Cherokee with Southwestern Wildlife Conservation emblazoned on its side, his wife's vehicle. Sarah Harrison emerged from the Jeep, her chestnut hair, now streaked with elegant silver at 48, caught in the breeze. For 22 years she'd been his anchor, his reason for coming home from assignments that had taken him to the darkest corners of human capability. As an ornithologist specializing in raptors, she had her own fierce dedication: the reintroduction of endangered golden eagles to their ancestral territories. The second vehicle appeared minutes later, a black Range Rover that purred to a stop beside Sarah's Jeep. From it stepped Robert Blackwood, the charismatic director of Southwestern Wildlife. At 55, with salt and pepper hair and a square jaw that belonged on magazine covers, Blackwood cut an impressive figure in his tailored outdoor gear. "Too damn perfect," Michael muttered to himself, adjusting the focus. In his decades pursuing America's most dangerous fugitives, he developed an instinct for people who weren't what they appeared to be. Something about Blackwood's movements, too controlled, too aware, had triggered those same warning signals from the first time they'd met at a fundraising gala 6 months ago. Sarah smiled at something Blackwood said, touching his arm with familiar ease. The gesture sent a cold spike through Michael's chest, more painful than the bullet he'd taken outside Albuquerque a decade ago. He lowered the scope, his mouth a grim line beneath his silver-flecked beard. The first suspicion had come 7 weeks ago. Sarah had been on the phone in her study, the Arizona twilight painting purple shadows through the windows of their ranch house outside Flagstaff. Michael had just returned from his morning hike when he caught fragments of her conversation. "Robert believes we need to move quickly," she was saying, her voice carrying that passionate intensity usually reserved for her research presentations. "The eagles won't survive another season of habitat destruction." Michael had paused in the hallway, years of surveillance instincts automatically engaging. "Yes, I understand the risks involved," Sarah continued after a pause, "but this could be our only chance to document the nesting sites before." Another pause. "No, Michael suspects nothing. He's completely absorbed in his wilderness survival school." Those words had hit harder than any physical blow he'd endured. That evening, he'd confronted her in their living room. The southwestern pattern throw pillows she'd chosen for their 20th anniversary framed her small figure as she sat tensely on their leather couch. Outside, the wind whispered through the ponderosa pines, a sound that had once brought him peace. "I saw you today with him," Michael said, his marshal's training keeping his voice level despite the turmoil inside. Sarah's eyes widened, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she sighed, her shoulders dropping as if relieved to set down a heavy burden. "I hoped you wouldn't find out this way," she said softly. "It's complicated, Michael." "Uncomplicated for me," he replied, settling into the chair across from her, deliberately maintaining the physical distance that had gradually grown between them over the past years. "After Juarez," she began, referencing his last assignment before retirement when he'd spent 6 months undercover infiltrating a trafficking network. "You came back different. You were physically here but mentally somewhere else. The nightmares, the silences that stretch for days, it was like living with a ghost. She looked directly at him, her hazel eyes reflecting the dying light. Robert understands my work in ways you never tried to. When I talk about conservation genetics or ecological corridors, he doesn't just nod and change the subject. He engages, challenges, expands my thinking. And that's all it is. Professional admiration. Michael kept his expression neutral, the same face he'd worn during thousands of interrogations. Sarah looked away. I don't know anymore. I know we've built 22 years together, but sometimes I wonder if we're just going through the motions now. The silence between them felt as vast as the canyons that carved through the landscape outside. There's an expedition leaving next Monday, Sarah said finally. Robert is leading a small team to document golden eagle nesting sites in the White Mountain Apache territories. Some of these locations haven't been properly surveyed in decades. She leaned forward, a spark of her old enthusiasm breaking through. I want you to come with us. Michael raised an eyebrow. As what? As our security and survival specialist, she replied. The territory is remote, dangerous, perfect for your expertise. And for us, maybe spending 2 weeks together in the wilderness will help us figure out if there's anything left to salvage. Michael studied his wife's face, searching for the graduate student who'd once patched him up after he'd been grazed by a bullet in a Santa Fe standoff, the woman who'd sworn she'd always have his back. 22 years of memories, some brilliant, some dark, flashed through his mind. White Mountain territory is treacherous this time of year, he said at last. Flash floods, mountain lions, cartel activity near the border areas. I know the risks, Sarah's voice regained some of its old firmness. I need to know where we stand, Michael, one way or another. Something in her resolve, that core of determination that had first attracted him, made his decision. I'll go, he said simply, accepting what might be their final mission together. Base camp nestled in a natural bowl between towering red rock formations, the kind of place most tourists never saw. As dawn broke, Michael methodically checked his equipment, a habit drilled into him during his early days with the Marshals. His pack contained survival gear that had kept him alive in situations most people only experienced in nightmares. From his vantage point, he observed the rest of the expedition team arriving. Robert Blackwood made his entrance in a gleaming new expedition, Southwestern Wildlife Conservation logos freshly painted on both doors. His field clothing, while expensive, showed subtle signs of actual use that most weekend warriors' gear lacked. Interesting contradiction, Michael noted. Most conservationists he'd met wore their equipment to death before replacing it. Michael Harrison, Blackwood approached with practiced charm and extended hand. Sarah told me you'd agreed to join us. Having a former U.S. Marshal with your reputation on the team is quite the asset. The handshake was precisely calibrated, firm but not challenging. Yet Michael didn't miss the calluses that matched those of men who regularly handled weapons, not just binoculars and specimen jars. Let me introduce you to everyone, Blackwood continued seamlessly. Dr. Ellen Winters, our raptor behavior specialist, James Chen, wildlife photographer, Mark and Diana Rivera handling our drone equipment, Carlos and Tomás, our guides from the White Mountain Apache tribe, and Mr. Peterson represents our financial backers. Sarah busied herself with organizing research equipment, avoiding direct interaction with either man. Michael caught her watching them from the corner of her eye, gauging their interaction like she might observe territorial behavior in her eagles. We move out in an hour, Blackwood announced, spreading a topographical map across a folding table. Our route takes us through Eagle Canyon, then north along the ridgeline where the last confirmed nesting pairs were documented. Dr. Winters adjusted her glasses as she studied the map. Robert, this route veers quite far from the known nesting territories. Shouldn't we focus on these eastern ridges instead? Precisely why we need to explore the Western approach, Blackwood replied with the easy confidence of authority. These areas have been undersurveyed because of their difficulty. With Michael's expertise, we can safely access locations other research teams couldn't reach. Michael said nothing, but mentally flagged the inconsistency. Blackwood's chosen route ran suspiciously close to the old Apache hunting grounds, areas now frequently used by smugglers moving between Mexico and the reservation's more remote sections. The caravan departed as morning heat began to shimmer off the rocks. Michael drove point in the lead vehicle, an old habit from convoy security during prisoner transports. Carlos rode shotgun, occasionally pointing out features in the landscape that wouldn't appear on any official map. "This place has history," the Apache guide commented, gesturing toward a narrow pass. "Old stories say the thunder beings live in those cliffs, not somewhere to linger after dark." Michael nodded, respecting the man's knowledge. "You've worked with Blackwood before." "First time," Carlos replied. "Usually guide hunting parties, photographers. Never been to where he wants to go. Strange place to look for eagles." By mid-afternoon, the landscape had transformed into increasingly rugged terrain. Red stone gave way to deeper canyons and hidden valleys where shadows gathered even in full daylight. They established their first camp in a protected alcove beneath a towering rock formation resembling a cathedral spire. While the group unpacked equipment, Michael quietly slipped away to scout the perimeter. 200 yards from camp, he discovered fresh ATV tracks, not the expected wildlife patterns, but evidence of frequent human traffic through an area supposedly untouched. "Found some interesting terrain features," Michael commented casually when Blackwood approached the campfire that evening. "Beautiful country, isn't it?" Blackwood smiled, his teeth gleaming in the firelight. "I've spent years studying these formations, the perfect intersection of beauty and isolation." "Seems others have discovered it too," Michael remarked, watching for reaction. "Border Patrol, probably," Blackwood dismissed with practiced ease. "They occasionally run surveillance through here." Sarah, who had been listening nearby while adjusting her camera equipment, frowned slightly at this exchange. Night descended with the startling suddenness unique to desert environments. Stars emerged with extraordinary clarity in the pollution-free sky, transforming the darkness into a glittering canopy. Most of the team retired early, exhausted from the day's trek, but Michael remained alert, watching Blackwood slip away from camp to make a call on a satellite phone. Though too distant to hear the words, Michael recognized the body language of someone giving precise coordinates and timing instructions, not the behavior of a man simply reporting research findings. The next morning dawned with ominous clouds building to the southwest. Michael studied them with practiced concern. "Flash flood warning," he announced over breakfast. "We need to move to higher ground immediately." "Nonsense," Peterson from the financial backers interjected. "The forecast mentioned only a 20% chance of precipitation." "20% here isn't like 20% in Chicago," Michael replied evenly. "When it hits, these canyons become death traps within minutes." "Mr. Harrison is right," Carlos added, eyeing the distant clouds with obvious concern. "My grandfather died in a flood like this. The water comes like a wall." "We can't afford delays," Blackwood said firmly. "Our timeline is already tight." "Your timeline won't matter if we're all drowned," Michael countered. Sarah had been watching this exchange with growing awareness, her scientific mind visibly reassessing variables. "I think we should listen to Michael. Flash floods are no theoretical danger out here." The distant rumble of thunder punctuated her statement like cosmic affirmation. They had just finished securing equipment on higher ground when the storm hit with biblical intensity. Rain transformed from sporadic drops to sheets of water within minutes. The dry washes and gulches around them suddenly churned with muddy torrents carrying debris, small trees, even boulders tumbling along with terrifying force. From their vantage point on the ridge, they watched as the path they would have taken disappeared beneath 6 feet of raging water in less than 5 minutes. "My God," Ellen Winters whispered, her face pale, "we would have been." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The storm passed as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind a transformed landscape. As they cautiously made their way back to inspect the campsite, Diana Rivera spotted something glinting in the newly washed earth. "What's this?" she called, bending to retrieve the object. Michael reached her first. In the mud lay a high-caliber shell casing, recently fired from its clean appearance. Nearby, darker stains marked the rocks, blood washed but not completely removed by the rainfall. "Hunters," Blackwood said dismissively. "Probably after bighorn sheep, though it's completely illegal in this territory." "Interesting theory," Michael replied, examining the casing with expert eyes. "Unusual choice of ammunition for game hunting, though. This is military-grade, long-range precision shooting." "Poachers are using increasingly sophisticated equipment," Blackwood explained, reaching for the casing. "I'll document this for my contacts at Fish and Wildlife." As he slipped the casing into his pocket, his jacket shifted slightly, revealing what Michael instantly recognized as a custom shoulder holster. Not the standard sidearm a researcher might carry for snake protection, but serious hardware designed for human threats. Sarah saw it too. For the first time since the expedition began, she and Michael truly connected in a moment of shared realization. The days that followed brought mounting tension and suspicion. Chen's camera equipment malfunctioned after the storm, sand and water damage, he claimed, though Michael noted the man seemed more relieved than upset. Peterson grew increasingly agitated about their timeline, making cryptic phone calls when he thought no one was listening. On the 4th day, Tamaz collapsed while scouting ahead, a venomous scorpion sting that quickly threatened to become life-threatening. "He needs medical evacuation," Michael stated flatly. "His breathing is already compromised." "We can't abort now," Peterson objected vehemently. "We're too close to," he caught himself, "too close to our primary research objectives." "A man's life trumps your objectives," Michael replied, his marshal's authority resurfacing. The debate ended when Tamaz began seizing. Even Blackwood couldn't argue against the medical emergency. The team decided to split. Carlos would drive Tamaz back to civilization with the Riveras and their non-functioning equipment, while the core research team would continue. As the evacuation vehicle disappeared in a cloud of dust, Blackwood turned to the remaining members with a strange intensity in his eyes. "We're close to something remarkable," he announced. "A location I've suspected might contain the last pure genetic line of southwestern golden eagles. I propose a small team push ahead, myself, Sarah, and Michael. What do you say, Harrison? Up for a bit more adventure?" The challenge hung in the air between them, both men understanding they were talking about much more than birds. "I've tracked men through worse terrain than this," Michael replied evenly. "I'm in if Sarah is." She nodded firmly. "This is what we came for." The smaller group traveled light and fast, Blackwood setting a demanding pace. They moved deeper into territory where cell signals vanished completely and satellite phones became the only link to the outside world. With each passing mile, Michael noted how Blackwood's navigation grew more precise, more confident, as if following a route he'd traveled many times before. On the morning of the 3rd day, they crested a ridge to find an unexpected sight in the valley below. Nestled among the natural rock formations stood a compound, several low buildings camouflaged to blend with the surroundings, and what appeared to be a crude airstrip. "What the hell is that?" Sarah asked, lowering her binoculars in confusion. "Abandoned Border Patrol Forward Operating Base," Blackwood offered smoothly. "They set these up during the cartel wars, then mothballed them when funding got cut." "Strange it's not on any of my maps," Michael commented, noting the fresh tire tracks and disturbed soil around the perimeter. Government doesn't advertise these locations, Blackwood replied, for obvious reasons. They approached cautiously. As they drew closer, the compound showed unmistakable signs of current use: generator hum, satellite equipment, fresh boot prints in the muddy areas from the recent storm. Sarah moved eagerly toward the main building, her researcher's curiosity piqued. Michael caught her arm, holding her back. The look they exchanged was their first moment of true connection in months, unified concern. The door to the main building swung open. Two men emerged carrying tactical rifles with the practiced ease of professionals. Their military-style haircuts and stance spoke volumes to Michael's trained eye. These weren't researchers or even law enforcement. They had the unmistakable bearing of mercenaries. "Welcome to my operation." Blackwood's voice changed completely, dropping the conservationist facade. "I'm afraid I've been less than forthcoming about our actual purpose here, Sarah." "Robert, what is this?" Sarah's voice trembled with confusion. Instead of answering, Blackwood nodded to his men, who pulled open the doors to a large outbuilding. Inside, Sarah gasped audibly. The space resembled a macabre natural history museum. Glass cases contained mounted specimens of endangered species: golden eagles, Mexican wolves, ocelots, bighorn sheep, all posed in lifelike positions. Refrigeration units hummed along one wall. Workbenches held tools for taxidermy and preservation. In the corner, cages contained several live animals, including two juvenile golden eagles. "No," Sarah whispered, "this can't be real." "It's very real." Blackwood ran his hand almost lovingly over a magnificent eagle specimen with wings spread in eternal flight. "Do you know what certain collectors will pay for perfect specimens like these? What Chinese traditional medicine markets will pay for organs and body parts? One golden eagle can fetch $50,000 when properly processed." "You used me." Sarah's voice shook with rage and betrayal. "All your talk about conservation, about protecting endangered species." "You were an excellent resource," Blackwood shrugged. "Your research helped us locate populations no one else knew existed, and you were so eager to believe in the cause that you never questioned when we moved in after your surveys were complete." Michael had positioned himself slightly in front of Sarah, his eyes methodically scanning the room, cataloging threats, exits, and potential weapons. 4 armed men excluding Blackwood, 2 visible exits, fuel containers stacked near the eastern wall. "What happens now?" Michael asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Now," Blackwood drew a pistol from his concealed holster with practiced ease. "Now I eliminate complications. I'd like to say it's nothing personal, but in your case, Harrison, that would be a lie." At that moment, a distant rumble rapidly grew louder. Another storm system moving in, this one carrying the distinctive sound of desert microbursts, violent downdrafts that could reach hurricane force within seconds. Michael reacted with the speed and precision that had kept him alive through decades of manhunts. He toppled a heavy shelving unit toward the guards while simultaneously pushing Sarah behind a metal storage container. A shot rang out, the bullet striking the wall inches from where they'd been standing. The storm hit the compound like an apocalyptic fury just as chaos erupted inside. The microburst tore at the building's roof, sending corrugated metal sheeting flying and plunging sections of the space into darkness broken only by flashes of lightning. The power failed, emergency lights flickering on and casting grotesque shadows across the macabre collection. Michael became a ghost in the chaos. A lifetime of high-risk fugitive apprehensions had honed his abilities to near-superhuman levels. He moved silently through shadows, neutralizing threats with precise efficiency. The first guard went down without a sound, a carotid strike dropping him instantly. The second never saw the blow that incapacitated him. "Find him," Blackwood shouted, firing blindly into the darkened corners. The remaining guards moved with professional caution, but they were up against a man who had tracked America's most dangerous fugitives through every kind of terrain. Michael seemed to materialize from nowhere, disarming the third guard with a technique taught only to specialized federal tactical teams. A bullet grazed Michael's arm, burning like fire, but the pain only sharpened his focus. In the strobing emergency lights, he caught glimpses of Blackwood's face, twisted with rage and fear as he realized he was facing a predator more dangerous than himself. "This isn't like hunting defenseless animals, is it?" Michael called, his voice seeming to come from everywhere in the cavernous space. The final confrontation was brutal and swift. Blackwood fought with the desperation of a cornered animal, but Michael had survived encounters with men who had nothing to lose. Block, strike, redirect, movements drilled into muscle memory through thousands of hours of training. "Sarah, the exit," Michael shouted, spotting the fuel containers near the wall. With lightning speed, he seized one and hurled it toward the remaining guards. A panicked shot ignited the fuel, and flames erupted with explosive force. The blast waved through everyone against the walls as fire engulfed the building with terrifying speed. Years of poaching trophies became kindling, rare animal specimens consumed in a purifying inferno. Cages collapsed, releasing the surviving animals into the storm. Through the roar of flame and wind came Blackwood's enraged scream. "You can't escape. This entire territory is mine." The compound burned like a funeral pyre, sending columns of black smoke into the raging storm where they twisted into nightmarish shapes against lightning-illuminated clouds. Michael pulled Sarah away from the inferno, both of them hunched against the driving rain and howling wind. Behind them, occasional gunshots punctuated the storm's fury, Blackwood's remaining men firing blindly into the elements. "We need to reach the eastern ridge," Michael shouted over the cacophony. "There's a cave system we can shelter in." Sarah nodded mutely, shock evident in her eyes. The betrayal she'd experienced had shattered something fundamental in her understanding of the world and her own judgment. Michael recognized the expression. He'd seen it in witnesses who'd discovered trusted community figures were actually predators. Suddenly, a dark figure materialized from the storm-lashed darkness. Blackwood moved with the desperation of a dying predator, blood streaming from a head wound, his expensive outdoor gear in tatters. "You think this ends here?" he bellowed, his voice barely audible above the storm. "You've destroyed everything I've built." He raised his gun with trembling hands. Michael shoved Sarah aside as the shot went wide. The two men collided in desperate combat, rolling perilously close to a storm-swollen wash now transformed into a raging torrent. Michael felt the ground giving way beneath them as the water undercut the bank. 15 feet below, the flash flood churned with deadly force, carrying jagged debris capable of impaling a human body. Blackwood sensed the danger too. He froze momentarily, his body tensed in primal fear, though he maintained his grip on the pistol. "Know what's ironic?" Blackwood gasped, blood mixing with rain on his face. "I actually respect your eagles more than most. They're perfect killers, no sentiment, no mercy." "You understand nothing about nature," Michael countered. "It's not just about killing, it's about balance." Sarah stood several yards away, frozen in the downpour. Her eyes widened in horror as she registered their precarious position at the eroding edge of the flood. "Robert," her voice barely carried over the storm, "was everything a lie?" "The only truth is survival," he shouted back, something manic flickering in his eyes. "The weak provide for the strong, that's nature's only law." A violent surge of water undercut more of the bank. Michael felt the earth shifting treacherously beneath them. He and Blackwood teetered on the literal edge, locked together above the raging torrent. With a calculated risk, Michael suddenly released his grip and stepped back. "One last choice, Blackwood," he said, pulling their remaining canteen from his pack. He placed it on a rock between them. There's enough water here to reach the ranger station to the east. Choose, take Sarah or take the water. Show us who you really are." Sarah held her breath. Blackwood looked from the canteen to her and back again. For an instant, something almost human flickered across his face before being subsumed by the cold calculation of survival. His movement was lightning fast. He snatched the canteen and leaped backward, aiming his pistol. "Here's my choice," he shouted through the downpour. "I choose me, you two can feed the coyotes." But nature made the final decision. The bank, undermined by the raging water, collapsed beneath him. Blackwood clutched desperately for purchase, but the saturated earth gave way. His face transformed from triumph to terror in an instant as he plummeted toward the churning flood below, still clutching the canteen as he disappeared into the roiling torrent. Michael lunged forward, grabbing Sarah and pulling her back from the collapsing edge. They fell away from danger, gasping in the driving rain, the adrenaline of survival temporarily overwhelming everything else. The storm gradually subsided, as summer monsoons in Arizona often do, with surprising suddenness. The sun broke through thinning clouds, illuminating a landscape transformed by water's power. Somewhere in the distance came a haunting cry, the distinctive call of a golden eagle soaring free above the newly washed desert. "We need to start walking," Michael said quietly, rising and helping Sarah to her feet. "There's a ranger station about 15 miles east." She nodded silently, still processing the shocking revelations of the day. Tears mingled with rain on her face, whether for the betrayal she'd experienced, the animals who had suffered, or the marriage that now hung in uncertain balance. They began their journey across the transformed landscape, holding hands not from renewed affection, but from the pragmatic need to support each other across treacherous terrain. Far below, the flood waters continued their relentless journey, carrying away the evidence of Blackwood's enterprise, and somewhere within them, a man who had chosen survival but found only destruction. 8 months later, the mountain sunrise painted the windows of Blue Ridge Recovery Center in shades of amber and gold. Sarah sat in the solarium, a notebook open on her lap, though she hadn't written anything for the past hour. After 6 months of therapy, the nightmares had finally begun to recede. The terrible visions of Blackwood's face as he fell, the burning building full of dead animals, the flood waters that had nearly claimed them all. "You're making remarkable progress, Dr. Harrison," her therapist Dr. Wilson had told her during their session yesterday. "Trauma like yours doesn't heal linearly, but you've done the hardest work already." She nodded absently, watching a red-tailed hawk circling above the pines. The irony wasn't lost on her, that she still found beauty in the very creatures that had indirectly led to her downfall. Her academic career had survived barely, after she'd become a key witness in the federal investigation that dismantled 3 major wildlife trafficking networks. The television in the common room rarely caught her attention anymore, but the headline scrolling across the bottom of the screen made her pause. "Former U.S. Marshal receives Presidential Citizens Medal for exposing international wildlife trafficking ring." The camera cut to Michael standing at a podium, looking uncomfortable in a formal suit that couldn't quite disguise the outdoorsman beneath. "The criminal networks we uncovered were using conservation organizations as fronts for sophisticated poaching operations," he was saying, his voice steady and authoritative. "By posing as researchers, they gained access to protected habitats and information about endangered species that enabled systematic exploitation on an industrial scale." The investigation had revealed that Blackwood's operation extended across state lines and international borders, with connections to wildlife trafficking syndicates in Asia and Europe. The cooperative effort between federal agencies had resulted in the largest seizure of illegal wildlife products in U.S. history. Blackwood's body had eventually washed up 30 miles downstream, still clutching the canteen in a death grip. The desert had claimed him, as it claimed all those who failed to respect its power. Sarah closed her notebook and walked to the window. The morning light caught the simple gold band she still wore on her left hand. Michael had visited twice during her treatment, awkward, hesitant encounters full of things unsaid. Their last conversation had ended with a tentative suggestion. "When you're ready," he'd said, "maybe we could try a different kind of expedition, something small, just us." She hadn't given him an answer yet. 22 years couldn't be erased, but neither could they be simply restored. Like the desert after a flash flood, their relationship had been fundamentally altered, scoured down to bedrock in some places, with new channels carved where none had existed before. Outside, the hawk caught a thermal and soared higher, becoming a dark speck against the vast blue sky. Sarah watched until it disappeared from view, then turned back to her notebook. For the first time in months, she began to write.